Honourable Member. Dr Cam Calder.
Mr Speaker, it's a great pleasure to rise and take a call on the Appropriations 2011-2012 Estimates Bill, and I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to my colleague, Honourable John Carter, who's a gentleman, a good man, someone who's contributed hugely to our country and will be sadly missed in the House. I wish him well in his retirement in the Cook Islands, and I'm delighted to hear from his own lips that he intends to return and take the field again for the parliamentary rugby team. Right. Mr Speaker, during the course of this debate we've heard a lot of comments made about how the opposition haven't really actually been addressing the issues facing our country in a time of unparalleled global financial stress. I have to say we have heard a lot from the opposition about coats of paint on historic buildings and new carpet, but I do have to say that indeed the Leader of the Opposition did attempt to address the economic situation in his speech on the budget a couple of weeks earlier. A guttering candle, of course, a guttering candle of a speech compared to the Prime Minister's arc-like oratory, but in that speech the Honourable Phil Goff made a comment that the global financial crisis finished in 2009. An astonishing claim, yet sadly all too reminiscent of the wild flights of Erzart's economic fantasy that erupt from those opposite on occasions. It was interesting to watch the opposition benches. David Cunliffe choked. Grant Robinson's jolly demeanour slipped for a while Shane Jones just grinned to himself and continued drafting possibly a future leadership acceptance speech. The rest of the opposition caucus, of course, failed to notice and remained in the ordinary state of torpor that is their default position. A statement like this from their leader, Mr Speaker, is yet another reason why the Labour Party lacks any economic credibility with hard-working New Zealanders. These New Zealanders know, even if the Honourable Phil Goff doesn't, that the US economy, the largest in the world, the engine room, has an horrendous budget deficit, sky-high levels of debt, and a housing market that's seen a bigger percentage drop in value than was witnessed in the Great Recession of the 1930s, and there is no indication that it has stabilised yet. In addition, the Federal Reserve is debating a third round of quantitative easing. So that's the US, the engine room of the world economy. Is there any good news, perhaps, on the across the Atlantic that Mr Goff perhaps had privileged access to? No, in fact, there is not. A few days after his speech, the European Union raised €4.75 billion for Ireland and Portugal by a bond sale executed by the European Commission on behalf of the EU member states via the European Financial Stabilisation Mechanism. The €60 billion European Financial Stabilisation Mechanism is the lesser known of the two bailout funds that the European Union has set up to deal with the ongoing European debt crisis. The other, the European Financial Stability Facility, is headquartered in Luxembourg. It's essentially an independent offshore bank with €250 billion to lend to various troubled member states. The idea behind both bailout mechanisms is to sequester the peripheral countries in trouble from the international markets, giving them time to undergo austerity measures and cut budget deficits. The global financial crisis is alive and well. These mechanisms may be of doubtful legality, but the European elite are prepared to sweep any such concerns under the rug, because greater concern is that they have prepared to expect such concerns under the rug. Of greater concerns because they have no control over it and because it could potentially scuttle all efforts to sequester the crisis is the mounting populist angst in the countries doing the bailing out and the countries being bailed out. The rise of Eurosceptic parties in Germany and other core Eurozone states, Mr Speaker, is leading to a lot of turmoil among the students, the youth and unions in the streets of Spain, Greece and Portugal and other peripheral economies could potentially further deepen the economic storm by derailing those efforts to mitigate it. Amid the confusion, ratings agency Fitch have downgraded Greece further below junk status, and Standard & Poor's the next day lowered Italy's rating outlook. Unlike Mr Goff, Mr Speaker, this government recognises these are tough times. This is a budget for tough times, Mr Speaker. This is a budget of respect, a budget by a government that has respect for the hard-working Kiwi families which are at the core of our society. The previous administration cynically encouraged New Zealanders to mine the fool's gold of bountiful access to cheap international credit. This diverted attention from the Labor government's supervised neglect and woeful underperformance of our tradable sector, as well as the general parlous state of our economy under their watch. Fuelled by ever-spiralling amounts of borrowed money, New Zealanders embarked on an unproductive spending frenzy on houses and consumer goods. Household debt rose to a peak of 159% of disposable income by mid-2008. Since inheriting an economy in crisis, this government has worked constantly to cushion New Zealanders from the harshest edges of the recession, whilst at the same time working to turn the economy around in the face of the worst global financial crisis in decades, a crisis that continues to this day, Mr Speaker, and an almost apocalyptic series of natural disasters here at home. We've made no secret of the size of the challenges we are facing, and every New Zealander knows that the government has been borrowing $380 million per week. They understand that such budget borrowing cannot continue, that it is patently unsustainable. If we keep doing what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. We believe New Zealand can and must do better than that. New Zealand's hard-working families agree and understand the need for change in how New Zealand is run. Across the country, New Zealanders understand clearly why we need to get spending down, which we're doing, cutting out waste, which we're doing, and making New Zealand Incorporated work more efficiently, export more, and start to pay off that burdensome debt. What is the opposition's plan to grow our economy? Sadly, Mr Speaker, there appears to be no plan. Just more tax, borrow, spend and hope. More lazy, shotgun thinking from which the country suffered so grievously under the last administration. They have signalled their intention to take the GST off carrots and raise the taxes paid by hard-working New Zealanders, an oddly perverse version of a carrot-and-stick policy. Under Labor, Mr Speaker, New Zealand would borrow a staggering, stratospheric extra $45 billion from 2008 to 2014, a decision virtually guaranteed to drive New Zealand deep into the economic morass and fiscal bog. If Labor's economic flights to fantasy were ever implemented, the international credit agencies would be tolling their equivalent of the lutein bell for another economy lost. New Zealanders know that Labor's profligacy is not an option. They know we have to grow the economic cake and be prudent guardians of the public purse. We are taking a balanced and considered approach on our path back to surplus, protecting health and education and income support for the most vulnerable as we do so. It was a great pleasure for me to go to Manurewa recently, visiting Wiri Central School and seeing the pilot program of a health program in the school to swab kiddies' sore throats early and avoid that appalling ravage of rheumatic fever which affects far too many in our community in New Zealand today. An example of more spending in areas that matter, more spending in health, and of course we've got some very, very good spending in education. We're spending an extra $550 million in early childhood education, which is going to improve the participation for Maori and Pacifica children people in our society who currently miss out. Thank you.
Call Darian Fenton.